What occupies your mind will occupy your heart.
Welcome to the La Casa de Cristo Sermoncast. We invite you to check out our website, lacasadecristo.com, for everything going on at the church. Also, follow us on social media under the username La Casa Family. Now, let's get into the sermon.
It's all over, but the shouting. Christmas will end on Tuesday, January 6th, the day of Epiphany, when the 12 days of Christmas come to an end. But already, maybe many have put their decorations away or begun to do so. And certainly the sanctuary seems a little more bare at this time and not as colorful. But the reality is, even though our culture says Christmas is over, it is not yet. And even though on December 26th, the stores began to move in the Valentine's Day merchandise, it is not over yet. You know, there's an old saying, kind of a funny saying about the time of Christmas, that every human being goes through three stages in their life: when they believe in Santa Claus, when they struggle to believe in Santa Claus, and when they look like Santa Claus. But the reality is that beyond what our culture says, there's still some instruction for us in these last days of Christmas. And that instruction comes from the Magi, the wise men. And we're going to explore that this morning, because in this powerful gospel that Don read for us this morning about the coming of the wise men, there's some myths around the wise men and the Magi, and there's also maybe some surprises in store for us as we all learn together this morning. First of all, I hate to negate the hymn that we just sang. It's one of my favorite Christmas carols, We Three Kings. But the Magi were not kings at all. That is just a tradition that developed. Who were the Magi? Well, it may surprise you that when we go back in the Hebrew scriptures, the Magi are not mentioned first in the scriptures, in the Gospels at the time of Jesus' birth. But if we go back to the book of prophecy of Daniel, which we studied here not long ago at La Casa, you will see there the first mention of the Magi in ancient Persia, in Babylon. Magi comes from a word, magus, which is an ancient word and where we still get the word today, magic. The Magi, the wise men, were astronomer priests, and they would, in ancient cultures before the Hebrews, divine from the stars and the study of astronomy the future of the people. What do the stars tell us about drought, about abundance? What do they tell us about prosperity or scarcity? What do the stars tell us about our rulers and our leaders? But during the time of Daniel, something different happened. And if you recall the story of Daniel, in chapter 2, he is placed over the priestly class. These were the Magi. These were the wise men. And of course, this caused all sorts of problems, which eventually led Daniel and Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego into the fiery furnace, because they weren't happy that their power had been usurped by this Hebrew outsider. But you see, hundreds of years before Christ, the seed was planted. And in Numbers chapter 24, it says, out of Jacob, a star will arise. So when that star alighted over Bethlehem hundreds of years later, the current day Magi must have gone back and thought of what their predecessors had told them, that the star in the east would portend that the King of Kings had been born. They were probably excited and nervous and scared, and they had to prepare for a journey of hundreds of miles that would last indeed a long time. They would have to travel through dust and through dirt to find the king. But the star to them of Bethlehem was not just random stargazing. It wasn't just random astronomy. They had heard the stories of the Magi who had preceded them from the time of Daniel, that the star of prophecy would come out of Jacob and herald the King of Kings. That's first, and then there's another important point about these wise men. We know from the nativity story that they brought the gifts of gold and frankincense and myrrh. Gold was the gift to the king. Frankincense was used in the temple as incense. It was also used as a balm and a healing oil. But it's the gift of myrrh that I want to focus on this morning. The myrrh, the manger, and the Messiah. Why? Because myrrh was an ointment. It would be used to heal skin problems and skin conditions. In fact, to this very day, you can go on Amazon, and if you don't believe me, look it up, and you will find there that you can buy myrrh in ointment form for a skin condition. And also in the ancient world, myrrh was ingested. I would not suggest that today, but myrrh was ingested and believed to have healing properties. Why was myrrh brought to Jesus? Because this would not be the last time that we see myrrh in the life of Jesus. It would be used 2 more times at the time of his death. When the soldiers offered sour wine, vinegar wine to Jesus to dull his pain on the cross, which he refused. It was sour wine mixed with myrrh. And when the women, last at the cross, first at the tomb, when they came on that first Easter morning, they had brought myrrh because myrrh was used to embalm dead bodies. The mark of the cross was upon Jesus even at his birth. And that's not a sad thing. That doesn't negate the story. That means that within the manger there is the shadow of the cross, and the myrrh that was brought by the Magi would be the myrrh that he would refuse to taste before his death, and that he would not be embalmed with because he had risen from the dead. So what do these ancient words have to do with you and me in North Phoenix and Scottsdale in 2026? What do they mean? Maybe we've learned something about the Magi this morning, maybe not, but that's okay because this has a very direct application, a very practical application to your life and mine. And so I'm going to ask you a question, and I hope you remember this question throughout the year, in the spring, in the dog days of summer, into the fall, and the end of this year as we get ready to celebrate Christmas once again. And that question to you is, what is your guiding star in your life? What is the North Star in your life? What is your guiding star? Is it the Star of Bethlehem, or is it a lesser star that you follow? What are some of those lesser stars? People follow the star of money. Everything revolves around money, the abundance of it or the lack of it. And for many people, that is their North Star. For some, their North Star is their focus completely on the past. They can't move beyond something that happened with them or to them in their past, and they dwell there. And for others, it may be inordinate worry about the future, worry about what's going on in our world or in our nation, whatever it may be, worry about your own life, worry about your loved ones. And all you can do is you can't live in the present and you worry about the future. And for others, maybe their lesser star is substance abuse, dulling pain with food or alcohol or drugs. You see, we're all human, and so all of us are tempted to follow those lesser stars. And the great good news on this first Sunday of 2026 is when we falter and when we fail, Jesus will be there to pick us up, to give us his grace and mercy. Ours is not a hateful or judgmental God who the first time we make a mistake this year, if we haven't already, and I've made plenty already, it is not that kind of God. It is the God who comes to us in love. And like those wise men who had to travel from ancient Persia, Babylon, modern day Iraq, modern day Iran, to go to Bethlehem to see the King, you and I will be on a journey of faith this year. And we too travel through dust and through dirt to find the King. Oh, things may be a little more convenient today, and we may not have the primitive means that they have, but we still have to take that road. And that road may be full of some detours and apparent dead ends and deviations in our life, but still the Christ is there, and still the star shines in Bethlehem. And when we make that our guiding star, when we make that our North Star, then it doesn't mean that all of our problems cease. But it does mean that they will be put in perspective. What about you? What's your star? You know, my father had a lot of wisdom, and there's two things that he said to me that I've never forgotten. The first is he said, Jeff, what occupies your mind will occupy your heart. What occupies your mind will occupy your heart. So if you're focused on those lesser stars, then that's what's going to occupy your heart. And if you focus on the Star of Bethlehem, then all those other issues, all of those other problems will be put in perspective. And the other thing he said was, in the time before electronic accounting, before QuickBooks, and before keeping track of things digitally, he said, I can tell a person's priorities. If they would hand me their checkbooks, I could tell you what their priorities are very quickly. What are our priorities this year? What is your guiding star? In the time between Christmas and New Year's, sadly, there was a house fire in Vancouver, and the firefighters responded to the fire. Now, the good news was the occupants weren't home at the time. They had gone to travel to see relatives for the holidays. But here was the problem when the firefighters arrived. It was the home of a hoarder. Not only inside the house, not only inside the garage, but also all through the front yard, appliances and junk of all sorts. And they wanted to unravel the hose because they had gotten there not long after the fire started. It could have been very well contained, but the fire chief couldn't let the men and women of his crew, he couldn't let them go in and risk their own safety. The hoses could have gotten tangled. So they had to clear all this junk out of the front yard till they got the hoses in the house. And by the time they did that, 2/3 of the house was consumed and gone. In a press conference later, the firefighter chief said, I wasn't going to risk the lives of my men and women because these people couldn't clean up their own clutter. I couldn't risk their lives. We wanted to save the house, but we couldn't do our jobs because of all the junk and the clutter. What's the clutter in your life spiritually that you need to get rid of this year? What are the lesser stars that you need to be aware of in your life so that you can follow the true star of Bethlehem? The pages of the calendar have turned, but God is the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow. And so may all of us continue our journey, making camp and breaking camp, traveling through dust and through the dirt of our lives to find our King. May we all follow the Star of Bethlehem. Amen.